James Francis is a member of the Penobscot Nation, and he asked us for some questions, which Sarah and I collected and sent on to him, so hopefully we'll have answers to a lot of those questions today. So thank you so much for coming, James.
Thank you.
Thank you for having me. So, I'm just gonna dive right into this. Kind of self-introduction. My name is James Eric Francis Sr. And I currently work as the Director of Cultural and Historic Preservation for the Penobscot Nation. Longtime historian. My scholarship as a historian is like more akin to being a geographer. So I study indigenous geography, looking at the links between a culture and the space they live in. So I guess, and this is one of the questions, would you like me to read the question so you know what I'm answering?
Or I can read them, it doesn't matter.
It says, how did you decide to make this your career, and what inspired me? So there were two key events that really pushed me in this direction. One was when I was 9 years old. I used to chum around quite a bit with Kirk Francis, who is now our chief, and we were walking by an elder's home, and we noticed there was a sign affixed to the house, a piece of plywood, and on that plywood was spray painted "Wounded Knee." So this is 1979, and so we went down over the hill, and I knocked on the door, and Kirk took off. And he left me standing there to my own devices, stuttering and stammering out, you know, what does the sign mean? What is "Wounded Knee"? Oh, come in. She was all curt when she first entered the door. What is it? And so, and after I asked her the question, she said, oh, come in. And I got cookies and lemonade that day. My grandmother, who, my mom was a single parent until I was 12. So it was my older brother and my younger sister and myself. And my mom was raising us. And for a long time, we lived at my grandmother's house. And, well, my grandmother had heard that this elder was asking me to stop back by. And I evaded it quite often. It's funny, I was always evading my grandmother, it seems like. I remember she was legally blind in one eye and completely blind in the other, so she couldn't see very well. And one day she was walking up the street, and it's winter time, and I don't have hat and mittens on, which was a big no-no. So all I did was I crossed the street, and she never saw me. But my grandmother found out that I hadn't been going back, and she made me. And so I grew up, from an early age, hanging out, not only with that elder, but other elders in the community, and they were telling me stories. And I was really curious about the tribe's history, but I never thought it was anything but, being a buff to history. And I joined the Air Force after high school, and I was at a point after 3.5 years, the Air Force starts to ask you, are you gonna make this a life thing or not? And at the same time, my grandmother was in the hospital dying. So I came home and I saw her for the last time, and I confided in her. I asked her about, what I should do, whether I should, live away from my community, from my professional career, or come home. And she had told me that I had been given a gift. And here I am, a 21-year-old kid. And she said, I had been given a gift, and now I know that it's, you know, all these time I spent with the elders learning about our community. But when I was 21, it was, I couldn't figure, I wasn't sure what she was talking about, but I got out of the Air Force and came home and went to college to study history. You know, I often talk about, at the time, the only gift I could remember my grandmother giving me was when I was 13 years old. I'm in high school, I'm a freshman in high school, but so is my older brother, who stayed back in the 8th grade. I skipped a grade when I was like, I went from Head Start to 1st grade, I skipped kindergarten. And so, he's older than me, but by the time he stayed back and I went ahead, when I became a freshman, I became my whole class's younger brother. And my grandmother, for my 13th birthday, got me a pair of Spider-Man underoos. Which are fine if you're 7 or 8, maybe 9 or 10. And it would have been fine, God bless my grandmother, because, you know, it was the thought that counts. But as I opened that, sitting 3 people away from me is my brother. And my brother is a guy that just, he's got to needle everybody. And he didn't do it openly. He would never like embarrass me at school. But he'd look me up and down and he'd say, what's up, Spidey? Anyway, so I got out of the Air Force and I came back home. And I started going to the University of Maine. And a very pivotal moment at the University of Maine, which really inspired me to continue on my path. I took Native Studies courses. I was interested in learning about federal Indian policy, and learned about the Trail of Tears one day, the forcible removal of Cherokee and Choctaw and all kinds of nations from their homeland to someplace alien. Now, when I was in Wyoming, that was something alien to me. It was a landscape that I knew nothing about, 6,487 feet above sea level, higher than any place in Maine, but seemingly flat. You know, you can see for 50 miles. My first wife, who was from Cheyenne, she came to Maine and actually felt claustrophobic. You can see mountains 50, 60, 70 miles away out of Cheyenne. Here you can barely see out of the yard.
Yeah.
So it's a very different kind of sense of a place. So as I was thinking about this, as I was walking across campus and thinking about these displaced tribes, in their homeland, they had generation upon generation upon generation of knowledge of that place. All of a sudden they found themselves in a place where, are those red berries edible? Never seen those before. Where do we get water from? So as I was thinking about this, walking across campus, it dawned on me that my tribe's never been forcibly removed. That generational knowledge still sits here. And Maine is pretty wonderful in that they have a plethora of native names that are still here, that we can look at, that we can study, we can kind of think about it, go out in the field and figure out what are they trying to say here, because what's who trying to say? Well, what's my ancestors trying to say? Why this name here? So those were my inspirations. I could feel myself going off on a tangent. I didn't want to do that. I really want to have a conversation today about what you guys are curious to learn about. So question number 2, it's about the river. So please let us know how the Penobscot people in the river got its name, its meaning, and the true native pronunciation. Right? So, Penobscot. So unlike European cultures, it didn't make sense for us to name a river one name. That the whole river wasn't known as a single name. Penobscot's actually a description, and it's pronounced Pαnawáhpskewi. Pαnawáhpskewi. And I'm Pαnawáhpskewi. I'm a person from that place. So it's a description of the falls at Old Town. So it's there's a dam there now, and there's some debate whether it means the place where the rocks widen out, which it does, but there's also this part of it has the word white in it. So wub, or wub. That wub is like waptagwe, Canadian goose, waptagwe. You know, is that white is in there. So it was always assumed that because there's no white rocks there, that it was always just where the rocks widen out. And I don't know, it was sometime after the other dams got removed, about 3 or 4 years after that, they found that they were counting all these salmon that were coming up the fish ladder that were returning to above the Milford Dam. So they put a big bathtub in it, raises up the salmon. They had a camera on it, and they were counting them. And then they had to go check on something underwater at the dam. They found a big hole that you could drive like a car through in the dam. And so they had to they had to lower all the water, and they had to put a cofferdam up to fix the dam. And so when they lowered that water, it's amazing. Because I grew up on an island in the Penobscot River, right above a dam. And the thing I've always wanted to know, what did the river look like before the dam? And there it was. In fact, there was some pictures that Frank Speck had taken back in the 19-teens, and I compared them. I went out to the same spot and was taking pictures, and it was actually lower than 100 years prior. And about 3 days after the water level dropped, this white appeared all over the rocks. It's like a natural thing, but I don't know if it's a lichen or I don't know what it was. But this whiteness appeared on the rocks. And I was like, oh, interesting.
Interesting.
So that is how the name came. Pαnawáhpskewi, like I grew up on Pαnawáhpskewi Lane. So it's just how you would say Penobscot in Penobscot. And we're probably named that because there was a bunch of people there when an explorer came, or when P'shay paddled down the river to meet Champlain and Bangor. Asked, where did you come from, or who are you people? And they just said, the people from that place. And so it's really hard to follow how that happened, but it did. What can you tell us about middens? Such as what the contents were, how common they were on the coast. You guys familiar with Juniper Ridge up in Old Town? The big dump that's up there?
Yep.
That's basically a midden. I mean, but the middens here, I mean, it's just a place to throw away shells. So we had seasonal. Sounds nomadic when I say it, but it's not. Nomadic to me is a group of people bumping through the woods and a berry bush we eat today. No, we knew where that berry bush was. We knew when those berries would be ripe, and we knew the easiest way to get there from wherever we were. It's a very sophisticated knowledge of a vast area of land. Portage routes and all the place names are like big green road signs on the side of I-95. They tell you something. So summertime occupation would be on the coast because there's a large amount of food source. Larger groups of people on the coast during the summer because of the availability of shellfish. And when fall come, your family would get in your canoe and you'd travel upriver to wherever your family's been going for generations. you want to go back to the place because, you know, us men are lazy and we don't want to have to learn how to hunt someplace else. So we want to go back to the same place we know where the deer are. We know where the moose are. We know where the bears are. We want to go back to that place. We want to go back to that place generation after generation after generation. Because in the fall, you go there to hunt and you go there to gather food. You put the food in your baskets and your birch bark containers and you store them, dry them, you store them. Because winter's coming. We have these moons, we have names for all our moons. And there's one moon that falls, typically, we just came out of it, I think 2 moons ago. But somewhere into January, February, there's this moon. In our language, it's Ugalu Samawazet Gizus. Gizus means anything in the skies, but it's the moon in this particular. And this means the moon that gives a little food grudgingly. So if you haven't been caching food, if you're not ready, these were starving times. So that's what you would do. But in the summertime, people would eat shellfish, and you would only make so many necklaces with the shells. You just throw away the shell. And everybody's throwing them over there. And then the dog chews up Sarah's buckskin trousers, which she's gonna make another pair. So she throws them away. Now, if she would have threw them on the ground, they would be gone forever. That their organic material, they would have disintegrated right into the soil. But that she threw them in the shell, which contains calcium carbonate, it preserves like all of this organic material down through the ages. An archaeologist a couple thousand years later digs out this pair of pants. Looking at them, you're like, oh, they made pants out of deer hide. Look at this. And look, canine teeth marks. They had dogs. So this is how they start drawing the picture. And so middens are really important to that. And I know there's a program, I think through the State of Maine Archaeology's office, where if you come across a shell midden and it's eroding, to let them know, because that's cultural, archaeological knowledge eroding into the water. And so they just want to know where they're all at to try to preserve as much of those as possible. So that's a midden. Trash dump. Getting back to the kind of seasonal thing, because it really points to this understanding, and we were talking about the hunting components. So we have the starving month. So the carrying capacity of the land here, if we were all the same tribe, we couldn't live together year round. Just not enough food in any given area for all of us. So that's why this kind of kinship band system kind of spreads people out on the land. My family may travel up all the way up to, say, Salmon Stream, up by the east branch of the Penobscot. Sarah's family may be just going up the Narrasimic into Orland area, but we all go to the same places. And then when we finish with the winter, there's an island in Greenbush. We have cultural tourism programs there where we take people on canoe trips, and you get to spend 4 days, 3 nights on an island. It's camping, but it's not quite glamping, but I mean, we have these little cabins that people with cots, and people can stay in those, and but we call it Sugar Island today, and we call it Sugar Island because it comes from a really long word which means sugar plum island, and a sugar plum is the fruit of a serviceberry bush. And this serviceberry bush has a nickname. Anybody know what the nickname is?
Sugar pears,
No?
shad bush.
Shad bush.
It has quite a few different names.
So shad bush, so this is interesting because on the western end of this island are all these serviceberry bushes, the shad bush, and they're called shad bush because that's when the shad are running. And they're in bloom like pretty early. I saw some on the way here. Big white tree in the middle of a kind of dull forest, been dull all winter, and all of a sudden in the spring you see this beacon come on. And it's an important place where Sugar Island is, because as people are traveling the river and they're looking for that, because just up from there is the place where we said we fishing, where a place we call Pănawáhpskewi. You heard of Pănawáhpskewi? That means above the gravel bar. There's a big gravel bar in the river. The river's like this deep. I mean, when you paddle through it, we paddle through it every summer, multiple times. And every year, we have to find the river in the river. So it's different every year because it's just a big shifting gravel bar, and you have to follow the water. There's a stream of water that flows through it, but it's different every year. So you have to kind of read the water. We're all standing up in our canoes looking to. Well, once you get down, it's all good. And right at the end of that is this old fishing weir. Sometimes with the water level you can see it. It was a zigzag that went all the way across the river. We called it okwachis, a fish ladder. And we do different things at this. The fish would all get pulled up behind. They could swim through these prescribed places, but it really slowed them down to find those prescribed places. And we could spear them, and we could net them. Sometimes you'd take a big piece of birch bark, and you would put your canoe crosswise in the river, and you'd lay that birch bark in the water into the canoe, and the fish would swim up it and then fall in your canoe. But this tree is telling us. It's like this. Especially at a time when, food is coming. So there's a place, Basin Mills near Orno, called Alewives Falls. And adjacent to that, we have this new community garden. We bought some land in Bradley, and they wanted to put a community garden over there. And the woman who runs it, she's like, "Oh man, I really love it there, and I'm so energized, and I feel great. Especially in the spring, it's just this wonderful place." And I says, "Yeah, I can imagine that." Have you ever heard of kind of just the landscape can hold trauma? I mean, there are some places on this earth where you just go there and you can feel what has happened there. I totally believe in that, but I also believe in the opposite. Here she is on this bluff of land overlooking these falls in the spring, and I'm like, yeah, I can imagine our people were all here fishing and finally getting something to eat after the moon that gave us a little food grudgingly. And she smiled and walked away. But I am working with her making a garden. But I mean, so it's just how we understand the landscape. There was a cultural geographer. He was Chinese. His name was Yifu Tuan, and he formulated that space plus culture equals place. And I wrote this on a piece of paper, and I have it tacked up in my office, and it's been there for a long time because it's so simple, first of all, and it's a formula. So if the way I think about this is, we have a space in Penobscot River Valley, including the bay. We have this space, and we all have, culture. So a Maine, American, Western science culture, and how we view this river, includes things like exploration, looking for the Northwest Passage, or log drives, industrialization, paper mills, then river restoration and cleanup. Now that's all looking from an American Maine, Western science, cultural viewpoint. And we get a certain framework of sense of place out of that. But what if we were to take, it's a formula, what if we were to take that culture and reinsert traditional Penobscot culture? It's a totally different place. So this is how my brain works. It's got that formula in it. But it helps me to reinforce some of the the historic knowledge that we have in oral traditions and all of that. It just helps reinforce that. What fish were caught in the Penobscot River? So, Pαnawáhpskewi is down here. It's a place we speared sturgeon by torchlight. Mm-hmm. So there's one sturgeon. There's a story that we have this weird looking fishing spear. It's called the Leister. It's got these grabbers on the side where you can really spear things like sturgeon and salmon. And we have a so we have this this oral story about how Penobscot people were at this very specific place. We know where it's at. It's a story that's geo-located, and it's Nasawatahunk Stream. Mm-hmm. Nasawatahunk is the stream that flows between the mountains. Mm-hmm. You may know Nasawatahunk Falls. Yeah. Mm-hmm. That means the falls basically near the stream that flows between the mountains. And that happens. And because the stream came first on upriver perspective, sometimes we have streams that are named the other way, that the stream is named for the falls. Penobscot in Bangor, they wanted to put a super Walmart. They really like to put Walmarts in like boggy areas. It's cheaper land, and they're just gonna fill it all in anyways, and they get the exact what they want so they can put their carbon copy building on it. So they were calling my office, well, what's Penobscot mean? And I was like, oh, it's kind of it's hard to explain, but it's like the falls that come into appearance. They're like, no, it's a stream. I said, well, Penobscot means the fall. And because the falls are first, and Penobscot is in the tide, sometimes there's no falls. And as the tide comes down, this is Penobscot. All of a sudden you see, as the tide goes down, you see the falls appear. That's Penobscot. I'm trying to explain this to them. But so, back to the story. So these two Penobscots were spearing salmon with a sharpened stick as the Mecum West, little people, were sliding down the rocks of Nasawatahunk Stream. And you still do it today. You can go in the stream and you can sit on your bottom and slide right down these polished granite rocks. The water's been flowing down over. Well, the little people are doing it, having a good time. And this Penobscot guy speared a salmon, and he tried to pull it out of the water, and the fish slid off and swam off with a puncture wound. And so the little people came over and taught us. Oftentimes little people's stories are about teaching us technology on how to do something better. And so they taught us how to make these Leisters. What really fascinates me about that is one, that we know where it took place, but they were fishing for salmon, like way up there. You ever been north on I-95 and saw the sign Panamascontis? Yep. Plenty of alewives. So there's another fish. We just talked about shadbrook. Probably not bass or pickerel, maybe pickerel. I know we don't have a word for bass. Yellow perch. I always revert to the dictionary. Like there's this big debate in Maine if there was mountain lions in Maine. Yeah, there's a whole book with all the accounts. I mean, there's a book that put out by the University of Maine Folklore. There's mountain lions, I think wolves, and another species of like the
Lynx?
quest. Huh?
Lynx?
No, I don't think it was Lynx. It was, but it was. It's a nice book, but there's all kinds of accounts in there. And all I have to do is look to the dictionary. Do my ancestors have a word for mountain lion? Oh, there it is. You know, so, so anyways, so plenty of different fish. When and where did they camp along the river? Well, they camped in so many places. Usually at falls, you know, especially in the springtime. Remember, in the springtime, you're at the falls because you're fishing, and there was a myriad number of falls. You know, Basin Mills in Orono, it was known as, you know, plenty of alewives falls, following Blackman Stream that was called Madamascontis, which is plenty of alewives. So there's more than one Madamascontis, by the way. We weren't exclusive on those names. So every species that is here. Places. So some of the villages that survived would be maybe more telling, just from a river perspective. You remember we lived in this vast area that included this watershed and the adjacent watersheds. You know, the Allagash, all the way to like, what is that, Fort Fairfield or Madawaska. There's another town up there. Anyways, into the Aroostook River and the upper waters of the St. John, and even into where Canada is today, into the Lanier and Chaudière rivers, and those are all really accessible, not to mention the Kennebec. And so there were all kinds of places, but then through treaties, our land base starts to shrink. You know, it's, you know, you guys should be practicing agriculture. I'm gonna put you on, you can, these islands in the river, and then like 6 miles on each side from head of tide up. And then that gets taken away, one side of the river first and then the next. And by 1818, the treaty with Massachusetts, the reservation gets defined as all the islands in the river from Old Town Island to the Forks, which is Nicketow, which is Medway. Fork of the East and the West Branch. And Nicketow in our language means a fork of equal weight on both. And the East Branch is, you know, kind of goes up the east side of Katahdin and around the north of Katahdin. And you can portage into the Aroostook River and into the Allagash from the East Branch. Paddle up that and you can get into those other river systems. The West Branch goes to the south and to the west of Katahdin, and then you can go into the Allagash from there, or you can continue on, and then the river breaks into a north and a south branch, and both you can get into branches of the Chaudière River. If you go to the north branch, you can go up into called Penobscot Lake, and Penobscot Lake has a boggy area on the western end, and just on the other side of that little boggy area is another lake, which is called Portage Lake, but that's in Canada, and that's the water's going that way. So most of there's a jagged line on the kind of western side of the state of Maine, kind of. Some of that follows the St. John River, the top of it. And the last thing, when you get to Little St. John Lake, that's the end of the stream in the lake, and it stops. And then it follows the height of land. So it follows the line between water hitting the ground and going into the St. Lawrence, or water hitting the ground and going to the Gulf of Maine. So the state of Maine draws that line, follows that ridge right across. Now, if you can get over that line, think of it like trees, like watersheds that are next to it, they never touch. Those branches get close. But if you can figure out a path through the woods from one branch to the other, like a squirrel jumping, you've just opened up a whole other river system. You can go up this river to Hamden, take a left at the sloping ledge, Psawdawpskewi, and Cook means canoeable. Psawdawpskewi all the way to, what's it called today? It used to be called Stetson Pond, but it's Pleasant Lake. To Pleasant Lake, and well, so Etna Pond to Pleasant Lake, it's about, I don't know, I think they walked it this summer, it was like 4 miles. But once you do that, and with beaver, making smaller ponds, you may have gotten closer than that, but 4 miles is nothing. And then once you're in the Sebastopol, which take you all the way down to Fort Halifax on the Kennebec. So what you just did was you jumped, instead of going all the way down the coast, past all those, every time you go by a finger of land like that we have in Maine, that's such a dangerous place to be in a small watercraft. Skip all of that, you just kind of jump through the landscape. Yeah, it's a 90-mile paddle. It's a 90-mile paddle, especially on the Psawdawpskewi side, but it's so worth it. So where did they camp? Historically, so Pawdawpskewi, there was a village. Old Lemon Island, which is near Greenbush, Maine. That was the last holdout. Pawdawpskewi, so the Pawdawpskewi stream where it hits the Penobscot River, there's a big village there. Thoreau talks about there was even a war there at one time. Our ancient enemies were the Mohawks, and they used to come here. And to get here, they would come up the Chaudière, and so they're not coming from downriver. They're coming from upriver. They're coming from our headwaters because they've jumped over the portages because they're St. Lawrence area people. So they went up to St. Lawrence. Chaudière flows into Quebec City. So it's the river that flows right to Quebec City. So they would just go up the Chaudière and then over the height of land and then boom, come down the Penobscot. We have islands called Mohawk Island, Mohawk Rips, where we had Mohawk Rips, we surrounded a swimming Mohawk chief and killed him, according to Florence Shay's history book that she wrote about our tribe. But they weren't trying to take our land. They were here to get beaver, because it was the beaver trade. This was the beaver wars, 1630s or so, that beavers got depleted in Mohawk country, and so they decided to be aggressive. We have burial grounds, islands, and we have a separate one that's Mohawk burial grounds, which is, we don't do anything with them, but it's interesting because all the other trees have been deforested at some time, and you go on these islands and the trees are humongous because we've never cut there. So it was just a place for those who had passed on. In 1846, when Henry David Thoreau goes up to Penobscot, he goes to Lincoln, Maine, and out onto the Pawdawpskewi Islands. A name we haven't been able to decode what Pawdawpskewi actually means. Too many questions. But he went there to hire a Penobscot guide named Louis Neptune. And Louis was the Jackson's guide when they summited Katahdin officially, like a state of Maine survey to measure how tall Katahdin was. He was their guide, in spite of Bamola. We'll talk about him too. So there was a village at Pawdawpskewi Islands near Lincoln. He never hired him, by the way. Thoreau ended up leaving early because a bunch of woodsmen, white guys, were heading up to where he was going. So he left like a day early because he told Louis, yeah, meet me up there in 3 days up in the town of Pawdawpskewi, and which is north of where Louis Neptune lived. Thoreau said, yeah, meet me there in 3 days, and Thoreau stayed for 2 because some other guys were leaving, and he took them up on that offer. Someone asked about Bamola. You notice I say Bamola with a B, because our P's, Pănawάhpskewi become Pănawάhpskewi. So it's, our P's sound like B's. Our T's sound like D's. So if I were to say, like the name for a beaver, which is Damarkwe, it's actually spelled with a T in our language. It's like international phonics stuff. We had a linguist, and he compiled a written language for us. So we have schwas and alphas and things like that. And it's great for linguists because they can just sit down and say, oh, I know what this is, and they can read, they can like pronounce it pretty good. But from a language revitalization, you know, we embraced the writing system because he had interviewed and spoke with and had informants, many Penobscot speakers he had in his time. And so we embrace it. And we have a lot of technology now around our language. We've recorded every Penobscot word, audio file, and we're building a studio right now so our language people can start putting more lessons digitally, meet people where they're at because they're on the screen. I'd rather have someone sitting up 2 o'clock in the morning learning Penobscot on their phone or iPad than not. So that's our big push there. So Bamola. So in the Penobscot dictionary, Bamola is, the term Bamola means he flies swiftly. So it has no like evil spirit connotations from a linguistic standpoint. And in historic times, you know, since contact, there's been stories in the community. They attribute Bamola to the stories about him taking children. But he wasn't the one taking children. It was boarding schools. It was overzealous fostering. It was all those things. So the story goes about Bamola in what I call the Maine Woods narrative. And you know, a friend of mine wrote this PhD thesis about the Maine Woods narrative, and I really like it because it really helps to frame the Maine cultural viewpoint of this place. You know, it helps me to think about that. In 1846, when Thoreau does climb Katahdin, there's this famous like shards of broken glass on a green plain. Have you ever read The Maine Woods? So he climbs Katahdin and he describes the landscape before him as this green with the lakes are like pieces, shards of glass. And he describes, you know, Millinocket Lake, the lake of various shaped islands is what Millinocket means. And the little cabin with the smoke coming out of it, and something about the inhabitants. So he wrote that in 1846, and a guy named, can't remember Reverend Todd's first name, but Todd had climbed 2-3 years prior. And he has a very similar, which he had published in Boston when he got back, something that Thoreau probably, it's assumed that he read it. So, but he borrowed it. He borrowed that kind of, that sensibility. And Stan Tagg, my friend who wrote this thesis, said that borrowing like happened all over the place. It's this big web. And he says, although Thoreau borrows from Todd, everybody's borrowing from Thoreau. That you see in all these writings, whether it's in the Maine Woods that the Rustic Railroad put out, you read some of those accounts in there, and they're creating this place, this Maine Woods experience. And it's a wonderful thing. I mean, I'm not dissing it whatsoever. But this whole kind of fever pitch about Indians don't climb Katahdin because of the fear of this spiritual crazy bird man with the, it's interesting how Dudley, picked it as a moose head, right? With a eagle's body and wings, and the guy drew it, and so that's the way everybody sees it. And we have these sketches that Andrew Dana did. Guy, he was an old man when I was a kid, but he had sketched it out, and it's this long, skinny being, has nothing to. But I'm like really pragmatic, and I study landscape, and I think about what took place. Was there a spirit on the mountain that kept us from climbing? Okay, but why? Because it's a spiritual place. You ever climbed Katahdin?
Yes. Yeah. My brother did this past summer.
It's a trudge. It's a trudge. Is there an everlasting berry bush up there? No. So the rigor to a ward is really skewed. There's, unless you had a reason to climb it, it was seldom climbed. And I can see that story being born out of an incident that happened. Somebody climbed it, they got caught in a storm, and all of a sudden we get to keep people from doing that, and all of a sudden this story's born.
Yeah.
And my wife tells this story. She found this account where Bamola actually saved hikers and kept them from going any further to go back down before the storm came. So.
First time, I just going flashing back to the kid, first time I did Katahdin. It was a summer after the ranger said, well, there was a woman up there who got trapped, and the ranger went to get her.
Yeah, they both died.
perished. And he said all winter you could see his feet sticking up over the night. So it might be springtime when they get his bodies out.
Yeah, that was a real not good move. She was on the knife's edge or near it, and saw a chimney pond and tried to go down that side, and she was an experienced hiker, but the ranger died. Yeah. All right, how are we looking on time? Oh, I want to talk about Fort Point a little bit.
It's 2:30. So
keep going.
Oh, she's kicking me out of students.
No.
So.
Never.
Fort Point is kind of a gathering place. It's a place with weight, and it works with another place. So I can't remember the name of the cove. It's down on the Penobscot River side of Castine Neck. There's a little cove there.
Wadsworth?
Yes, thank you. So that cove is the grassy place where we'd sit and wait. And I had for years, and this really points to the need, how important field work is. The grassy place we would sit and wait, I was like, oh yeah, there's grass there. And that waiting for the tide to go up so that when they got to the other side of the neck, they had to trudge through all the mud, because it's just a big mud flat on the other side. And that is what they're waiting for. But they're also waiting for to come here, to Fort Point. Because I went out there in a boat, and we came around Dice Head, and it was the most confused water I have ever paddled in my life. And I'm in a canoe, and I am thinking about my ancestors, and we got around and got in that cove, and we hung out there for a while. And I was like, wow, wouldn't it be a lot easier if the tide was going in and we had favorable winds, or at least one of those, more likely the current, and they would wait for the current to be the tide to go in so they could paddle to get to Fort Point. And from here, then they can just hug the shore and go up. and they'd wait here to do the same thing on the outgoing tide to get to the other place. So these are like these jumping off points, and they're not straight across from each other. I mean, you need to use that river it's going in to get over here. It's that's quite a body of water coming out of the river system into the bay as it comes by there. And so, but it never occurred to me until I was out here doing that I was like, oh, I mean, it makes so much more sense. And sometimes it's that simple. So 20 some odd years I've been doing place name study. This is the 4th generation map that has a lot of the research done on it. Working with the language folks at Penobscot, we published this map. Gonna leave one here. It comes with a little gazetteer, it's called, this little book. So the book, the map is double-sided. So on the one side, you're looking at Penobscot. And you're like, what does this say? And so the little book allows you to find that word in here and then find out what it's saying.
That's awesome.
Or if it's on the other side, the book is ambidextrous. It's like the map. So if I have, so that's Penobscot, right? So I look in here, I can find that Penobscot word and say, oh, that's what it means. Or if I'm on the English side, I say, oh, what is the Penobscot word for this? And on the English side, you're getting the translation of what it means on the other side. So the little book was pretty important for that. But me and Sarah put one up on the wall. It doesn't have to live there.
Thank you.
I want to just open up if you guys have any questions. I know I didn't get to all of your, I was just like.
That means you'll just have to come back sometime.
I love it down here. I have no problem coming down here.
Good.
Ash baskets and birch bark, so primarily. Gluskop shot an arrow into the ash tree and it split and we pounded, and ash is, the splints of ash are just the growth rings. You just pound that ash over and over again. I won't be sharing stories or mythologies or religious beliefs. That's something I don't do. Stories are only told in the wintertime. Like I could have told you that story. I told you about a story, but typically it was for winter moons. And a lot of elders are pretty strict about that. I am very familiar with Fanny Hardy Eckstone's book. I have about 4 different copies. They have notes through them. The thing I like about Fanny's Indian place names in the coast of Maine and the Penobscot River is that Fanny followed in the footsteps of this guy Ganong, who was doing place names in Canada, New Brunswick. And what Ganong was doing was finding every historical iterance of that word, whether he thought it was right, wrong, or otherwise. And Fanny did the same thing. She just says, oh, we got all these different iterations of what Casco Bay means, and here they all are. And Casco has to do with like a blue heron, and the word for blue heron for us is Gasco. But it's not having anything to do with the blue heron itself. The blue heron is named for being like he hangs out in the mud, and so Gasco, in the sense of the place and down in Portland, is probably named for the back cove and being like really muddy, like flats back in there. But that's what this is how we have to do it these days. So I talked about our enemies. Yeah. Any more questions? I think I covered all of those.
Sarah told me that Sears Island was sacred ground. What does that mean today?
What is
Why is it sacred?
why is it sacred? All the land was sacred. I don't think Sears Island was any more sacred than I mean, like I talked about, it was an important stopping off point. I'm sure people the island, shining shores. So there's this idea of this shining shore thing. It's on the map. I know it's on the map because I've heard the story before. So when we were doing the map, we had a cartographer, Dr. She's a Pαnawáhpskewi native, Margaret Pierce. She lives down in Rockland now. So Margaret and Carol, our language master, came down to Sears Island. We're hanging out, and they're trying to figure out what this kind of shining shore thing means. And they found out at sunset because of I don't know if they were on the mainland side or the part of the shore down from them. The evening sun was just like making it glow. So it's things like that happen. There's this. Sometimes it's an irritation to some elders in our community about things like the whole Sears Island thing, and when NIMBY comes up and people don't want things developed, then all of a sudden they're looking for ways to contact the tribe to find out if it's sacred or all of those things. And Sears Island is really important to the tribe, absolutely. And it would be a shame. I'm not going to share here, what those are. I had an elder tell me the other day, because this has been coming up, and if they're so worried about their island, just give it back to us, and we won't let that happen there. I thanks for having me. I had a babbly afternoon, but I think I answered most of your questions.
I have a question
yes.
for you. Glooscap.
Yes.
As a kid, I heard a story about the ledge over just before you go over the Narrows Bridge. And on that ledge, if you're coming from Verona Island toward Prospect on that bridge,
Mm-hmm.
and you look at that ledge, there's a, in the ledge, there's white, it looks like marble or something like that, it's very different coloration.
Mm-hmm.
And the story had to do with Glooscap, but I wondered if you knew anything about it or had heard about that story and.
No, it's consistent. So Glooscap was teaching people how to hunt moose, and this takes place in Moosehead Lake. And he picks up a stone, he attaches to a stick, notches it in a bone. He shoots his cow moose dead. Her and her calf are there, and shoots the cow moose dead, which becomes Mount Kineo in the story. And it sounds like this fantastic thing. Oh, isn't that wonderful? And for me, being as pragmatic as I am, I'm like, okay, why? Well, she doesn't turn it to just any stone. She turned it to that stone that he picked up and affixed to a stick. The story's telling us is this is the place to go to get stone to do this exact hunt. And Kineo's like the largest repository for fellsite and rhyolites for hundreds of miles. It's like a quarry. That calf runs across the landscape. It's kind of wintertime. Glooscap's got his snowshoes on, he's got his dog in tow, and he gets down here, and the young moose is swimming across the bay. And so Glooscap, jumps with all his power. He jumps over the bay and he lands at Dice Head, right at the tip of. And they say he landed with such force that his snowshoes made marks in the ground. Those marks are that white quartzite, first of all. So from that vantage point, he shoots the cow dead, and Cape Rozier becomes the rump. And then it was traditional, you would never feed your dog hand to mouth. And you would never feed the dog the sweet meat of the hunt. You always threw the dog the intestines. And so Glooscap throws the intestines, and they land on the shore of Long Island. What is that? Islesboro? Islesboro. We called it Long Island. And I went out there one day, and then he throws a liver and it lands over by Hickamunkin Reach. The liver is a reddish brown colored rock, very identifiable in a landscape that's all gray granite. But the entrails are all quartz. It's this big lump of quartz sitting on the shore of Islesboro right next to the narrowest part of the island where you'd want a portage. And when me and Dr. Bill Haviland lives out on Deer Isle, he wrote a book called The Place of the Lobster and the Place of the Lobster and the Crabs. That's one of our clans, the family of the lobster and the crabs. But he talks about Deer Isle. He grew up there, went and got his PhD, and he taught at the University of Vermont, anthropology. And then he came back and said, James, I want to write this book. And he grew up with interacting with like seasonal Indian people that came by. But he wanted to write this book of chronology of Indian people on Deer Isle. And he has, and that's that book. But we went out in the bay and he had this lobster boat. We pulled out, we're 12 miles away and we could see that entrail on an overcast day across the bay. So it's a little beacon, like a travel beacon, to paddle right for that. And that way you don't have to go way up around the island in either direction. You can just portage across it. So I do that. I don't even know what the question was. Did I answer your question?
Well, the specific question was that demarcation of white, I guess.
Oh, right, yeah, okay, yeah, the
Right
white.
there on that ledge.
Yeah, I have heard that. I heard some rumors about something was going on at that ledge. But I don't know anything specific. But it makes sense to me because it's the same material that is all through the rest of the story. And it's funny because you can go to Dice Head and you can see, you know, those marks. And you know, I often talk about how as an undergrad when I found this whole thing out about being in our homeland, I went and took Maine geology and Maine geography and all these courses. And I talk about going to this, you know, Dice Head and it looking like snowshoe prints. And someone once asked me, well, you took geology lessons, don't you know that's a blah 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 intrusion and you know, going on all geologic and I was like, yeah, I understand that. And they're like, well, which one do you believe? And I was like, well, it didn't matter because I knew when I came down over those steps past that lighthouse and got there, I knew I was in the right place because it's pretty clear. It looks like snowshoe webbings had been put on the rocks. And that's all that matters because it's a travel marker. It's something that, you know, is identifiable in the landscape that if you can tie it to story, then that whole story is about that material, but it's also about, you know, navigating the bay, but it's also about how to feed your dog, you know, so he remains a good hunter. And there's landmarks. The dog's out there. I don't know exactly where the dog is. Someone does. There's a rock that looks like a dog sitting on the shore, waiting for blue sky. Cape Rosier's the rump, and yeah, it's interesting. So I have a YouTube channel, James Eric Francis Sr., and I have a talk on there called the Penobscot Sense of Place. It's like an hour and a half of the kind of things that I was talking about most today, if you're interested.
I have one question and maybe a favor. My husband is very much in the Civil War and records Civil War soldiers and, well, if you have a list.
We do.
If you would like them to be recorded, end up in findagrave.com. He's the man to do it.
Have him give me a call. I'm on the Penobscot website.
You have,
Yeah.
yes, you give me a.
Yeah, we have a list. We have a monument.
Well, if you're interested, and I think.
Yeah.
He does a really good job.
So 7th Maine Regiment, like there was a small contingent of Penobscots who fought on it. We have a picture. Shows there's 3 or 4 of them in that.
Yeah,
At
so
least, yeah.
that brings us closer together, especially me. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Anybody else?
What about Sockalexis?
Which one?
The athlete.
Which
Were
one?
they both?
So Louis Alexis, baseball player, turn of the century, played for the Cleveland Spiders, had a short-lived career there. But then it is said that they named the Indians because of his participation there. Is that the Alexis you were talking
That's
about?
what I was thinking of.
Yeah. Well, there was also Andrew Alexis, ran in the 1912 Olympics as a marathon runner and got fourth place and finished really strong and admitted at the end that he messed up, that he didn't take off, he didn't employ his kick soon enough, that he had so much more energy and he just miscalculated. So, but fourth place in the, so that we have pictures of him with Jim Thorpe, you know, of Carlisle Indian School fame, and there's also another. He was a Sioux. They were called Sioux back then, probably a Dakota native. Ran in the same Olympics. Put the three of them together.
Well, those are the kinds of things that all Maine students should know, not just the members of the Penobscot Nation.
Oh, they were working on it. I
Good.
mean, the bill's only been around for 20 years, but the Portland schools are really leading the charge. And we also have a Penobscot who's working for the Maine Department of Ed, who's helping to put together some curriculum there. They're pilot testing stuff right now. So there's been some movement. I went, when I was still an undergrad, when I started working for the Wabanaki Studies Commission, so I kind of came in the heels of the law, like right at the beginning, and then went to work for the tribe and wrote, about $2 million in grants to develop curriculum. We have all kinds of curriculum. We share it. It's like,
There, not long after the bill passed, I was an elementary teacher then, I've been
Yeah.
retired for quite a few years. The Abbey Museum and the Penobscot Nation did an absolutely wonderful workshop down at the Abbey. It was 2 or 3 days.
yeah, oh,
And
do you
it
remember
was-
me? I was probably there. I was probably running the thing.
But it was all kinds of
I looked younger then.
information that they felt elementary teachers should know to be able to share.
Yeah.
But also, what I found really interesting was what things we shouldn't be telling
Yeah.
kids.
Yeah.
Because it was misinformation.
Yeah, of
And-
course.
I just wish that had continued on from when I took that course, because.
So we're doing things a little different now. We're working with the Portland schools who, for the last, I don't know, 5 or 6 years, they've been doing teacher training with us on the river and spending 3 days on Sugar Island Camp in June. And so I think this is the last year that it's exclusively for Portland schools teachers. And so I convinced Fiona and Tyler, who are running the program, let's just keep doing it. We'll find funding every year, and but we'll open it to all teachers in the state. So they get their continuing education credits. All of that's all baked into it. They just go camping for 3 days, and they listen to people like me. And my wife also runs our tribal museum, and she's a basket maker and a bead artist, and she's also a Maine guide. I'm gonna lose her for many weeks this summer. But she's getting ready for an Allagash trip right now. She leaves in a couple weeks. But she also runs our tribal museum, and we're in the process of, the building is it's still being built. It'll be done by the fall. And in that new administration building is a new museum. I don't think the museum will be open till probably a year from now. It'll take us over the winter to, and it's one thing to build a building, but you can't just throw stuff in it, as you guys know. It's hard to, it needs to look like and feel like a museum. So our collection is being boxed up and photographed and all of that, getting ready for the big move. But-
You're also building, or there is a museum being built, or a visitor center or something up at Katahdin Wind and Waters, is it called, or water?
Katahdin Woods and Water.
Woods and Waters, yes.
And the Gagabimuk,
Yeah.
visitor contact station. Yeah. Yeah, that's it's a national park building, but it has Wabanaki content. So I've been involved in that project from the beginning. My wife wrote the content for the building.
It's very exciting.
So she's an interpretive writer. She's so just something you want to say in 500 words, and they're like, you got 2 paragraphs. Yeah, thanks. I'm an artist also, and my artwork is in there. I got a painting in there. I've gotten 4 photographs that are in there, and I also hand drew a complete map of the Penobscot watershed that's getting etched into concrete on the floor.
Oh, nice.
So, yeah, that was, it's still getting etched in Ontario. So I drew them at, 1 foot squares. And then they get blown up to 4 foot squares, and that gets etched into concrete. And we figured out that if you're reading a piece of paper, so for me to see this like from right here, yeah, my doctor says I don't need glasses because I got long arms. But to see this the same as you're holding it, and if it's on the floor, it has to be 4 times as big for someone who's 6 foot. So that was our reason to blow it up. So it's not so small, but it's bigger, because you're gonna be walking on it. But it's contiguous. It's the whole Penobscot. It goes up this hallway and then into a big room, and the river spreads out. Views of Katahdin. Yeah, it's quite a.
And is it open in August?
It is open in August.
It's gonna be a
Floor or
big-
no floor.
Think positive.
Oh, yeah, I mean, it's supposed to be opening in August. I'm on that celebration committee, so yes, absolutely.
Very exciting.
It's so beautiful up there. They could have like clear cut the whole top of that mountain and put this building up there, but that's not what they did. This building becomes this kind of gem in the forest because it's pretty well forested still, and then they did everything they could to keep almost every tree. There's no like park-like up there. It's all natural. The trails kind of weave in and out of trees, so there's like these islands of like natural still as the path kind of goes from one spot to another. There's a eastern outlook that we can see the sunrise from this ridge. But the building sits on the western rim and looks at Katahdin from the east. So it's, it's beautiful.
Respecting the land.
We were lucky to save it because we had a president who approved it, and next president wanted to get rid of it. So we are very fortunate to held on to it.
The Gagabimuk. So it means as far as one can see. This is a travel term. So when you're traveling in a canoe, you travel by what are called looks. So if I tell you to go 10 looks up the river from Fort Point, you stand there at Fort Point and look up river, and I can see Verona Island up there. And so you head to that spot where you can see, and that's 1 look. And then if I tell you to go 10 looks, you do that 10 times. What can I see from here? It's funny when we were doing this map, the cartographer came and busted in. Because we're gonna do the scale, I have a little mileage thing on the maps. We're gonna do it in looks. How far is a look? It's like, well, I said, they're all different. It could be half a mile, it could be 4 miles, it depends. She's like, oh, okay. She goes, I guess that's not gonna work. So, but that's, and it was also on Lookout Mountain, was called, where the center is. So the Gagabimuk fit. But we also use it like as a metaphor because something happened on this project. So it doesn't have Wabanaki content. The brakes were put on this project, completely stopped. And everybody from the architecture to the guy delivering the porta potties, construction workers, landscape architects of record, was 2 sets of architecture, one overseas who designed it, but then we needed it stateside of record. All got training, all got like training on cultural sensitivity, and we hired a lawyer for the Wabanaki Advisory Board who signed MOUs with, if you look at the blueprints of this building, in the column there is this content to this building, whether it's design, anything, was inspired by Wabanaki culture, and that belongs to the Wabanaki. It spells it out. Our intellectual property was preserved in this, and so yeah, it's a huge. So when I talk about as far as we can see, I mean, metaphorically, you know, this becomes the standard for how we should be working with Indigenous people when on these type of projects, and you know, and I know I am chair of a nonprofit. We used to not be nonprofit, and I was the co-director for 10 years, where we provide intellectual property training and support to Indigenous communities, especially on things that, you know, museums have tribes' cultural heritage items, and they own them.
Yeah.
They have the legal right to them. But what kind of rights do those communities have? And what can those communities do working with those institutions? Next week I'm going to American Museum of Natural History, sit down and talk about the Penobscot collection that's there, and what are we gonna do?
In DC, you mean in DC?
No, the Teddy Roosevelt one on Central Park in New York. American Museum of Natural History has Penobscot stuff. And they closed down their hall recently because NAGPRA changed. So NAGPRA is a Native American Graves Preachers. It bolstered to the native side more, that's stronger. And so they were concerned that they weren't doing things right. There weren't proper consultations, and so they just closed a whole wing and took everything off exhibit. And so the first thing we did as a tribe is we wrote to every museum that we know of that has Penobscot stuff and said, we're right here if you want to consult. And so they called, and I'm driving to New York City. So, but this whole intellectual property thing we've been doing for years. So we've been working, and it's not that we want everything back. What I want is I want you to digitize it, and I want all the metadata, because I'm building a content management system that I can put in front of Penobscot people, and they can look at everything that's out there. And if it's, oh, those are wampum belts, we really need this back. You know, if things like that come up, then we take the next step, and this should come back to our community. And that's what the new NAGPRA law is saying, is that Graves Repatriation Act, you know, any funerary item, so anything, any bone, any human remains, and funerary items have to go back to the tribes. It's always been, it's pretty strong, and we have a repatriation committee that does that. But then recently it went on to say that the tribes will define what they consider of important cultural patrimony. And so that's what's making everybody in the museum communities nervous, is we're gonna define what's important. And so,
And you should.
yeah, so that's kind of what's going on with that. So, yeah, so I have to do a lot of travel.
You like it.
So I'm gonna leave that map for you folks. Thank you for having me.
Thank you.